Welcome to this section of the conference. I hope you had a nice flight to this place. For those of us that traveled all the way outside of Washington, it was a fun. Thank you for coming, and I hope you enjoyed the first speaker, the professor himself. My name is Pius. I am a Nigerian, and I'm happy I have a brother here too, who is from Nigeria, from University of Ibadan, sir. You're welcome. And I have a colleague from University of South Africa. I reside in South Africa, and I work with University of South Africa College of Law in the Institute of Dispute Resolution for Africa. So you are welcome. I hope you had a nice session with us. Briefly, in less than 20 minutes, because we have 1 hour for this segment, I'll be looking at integrating alternative dispute resolution into the South African criminal jurisprudence, an urgent need for law reform. Now, when you talk about ADR, it simply means there are other ways of doing things. The traditional way of litigation, the traditional way known to us for dispute resolution is through the court system. Everybody knows that. That's the Western way of resolving dispute. We all know that. But I'm trying to look at, without necessarily going through the Western way of resolving dispute, criminal matters for that matter, for that issue. That is why I'm looking at, can we look another way of resolving dispute in criminal cases outside of the traditional method of looking at criminal matters? Now, these are the things I'll be covering during the presentation. Now, we know that conflict is a universal phenomenon. There will always be conflict, whether between nations and nations, between individuals, and even in our houses, we have conflict. But the question is, what are the ways and the methods such conflicts are resolved? It's very important. As far as you have, even before you leave here today, you may step on your brother's stones and conflict arises. But the question is, how do we resolve them? Now, we know, for example, those of us that are a little bit knowledgeable in philosophy, Thomas Hobbes has said that, look, you see, we are always in a state of nature. And under the state of nature, we will always have conflict. Your rights will always be encroached upon by another person. And as a result of which, the conflict results, life becomes very solitary, life becomes very poor, life becomes very nasty and brutish, of course, and it becomes very short. And so, like I said, conflict is a universal thing, and it's present in every relation, in every social setting. And even particularly in our society. You heard the first presentation just now. You heard the first presentation. How conflict and criminality is becoming the order of the day. The procedures and methodologies and the strategies adopted by people who are in conflict in resolving them, is very important. And that is one of the things that I want to look at today. Now, because of the issue of conflict, I am saying that the use of traditional dispute resolution processes in criminal matters, commonly called the ADR, has been relegated. Why? Because in the traditional method of conflict resolution, we don't talk about ADR. You don't go to court, for example, especially criminal. In civil cases, you can talk about ADR. But in criminal issues, you don't talk about, even the court, the judges are not even ready to listen to you talking about ADR. It is confined to, ADR is confined to civil matters, to civil cases, to civil issues. And so the court does not want to listen to it. And so you don't hear us talk about it not even many people are aware about that. And so that is why we want to say, consequent above the above, consequent upon the above, ADR in criminal context contains little or no reference to its use at all in criminal justice administration. Now, the conceptual framework of what is ADR, that's what I'm just talking about here. is just ADR is processes other than judicial determination, in which an impartial judge or an impartial person called the ADR practitioner looks or assists those that are in dispute in order to resolve the issue between them. For instance, if me and my brother here or me and my sister there have an issue, we look for a third party who is neutral, just like the referee in any football match. A referee does not support either Arsenal or Liverpool. His own is to make sure that the game goes very well and fairly. That is what the third person will do. And so the third person that looks at that assists me and my brother to make sure that our hatches are buried, our differences are resolved, is the person we are talking about. So when the person comes in without necessarily following the traditional judicial processes, is called an ADR. And so ADR are sets of approaches and techniques aimed at resolving dispute in a not confrontational way. We don't have to fight each other. We have fought ab initio, but now we are before a judge, an unbiased judge. Okay, resolve this issue for us. I will not come and confront my brother. He will not come and confront me any longer. Now, what are these approaches? I'm still going to talk about them much later. And so, an ADR involves a neutral third person who helps and aids the disputant to resolve and reach an amicable solution to whatever has resulted. Now, what are the arguments in favor of using ADR, alternative dispute resolution, in criminal matters instead of going to the normal court? And you know that when you are taking your matter to court, especially in criminal cases, it involves the police. The police has to, apprehend maybe the criminal. The police has to investigate. The police has to initiate the matter in court, before the court listens and all of the processes. You understand? It takes a lot of time and there is no flexibility. But ADR is very flexible. It can be changed. The processes and the procedures can be changed. And secondly, it's very efficient. It's very efficient. And the disputant, the fighters, are in control of the procedure. What do I mean by that? For example, let me come again using my brother here. If I have issue with my brother, for example, both of us are in control. How and why is to allow freedom. Secondly, it is for us to determine who is the arbiter, who is the third party, or who is the third person who will be unbiased towards him and towards me. He doesn't take side. The third party does not take side. That is why we are saying that both of us are those that are in control. We hold to a large extent control over the procedure. We can tell you, this is how I want it to be. This is where I want it to be. It can take place where I decide. It can take place, the procedure can take place where my brother decides. Now, these are the advantages or arguments in favor of ADR. But in criminal matter or in criminal cases, when you take it to the traditional court, we don't have a say. In fact, the lawyer takes over the proceeding from the beginning to the end. And you, the victim, cannot even have a say. The only thing that the court uses you for is to be a PW1, the prosecution witness for the state. For the state. And when the matter is decided, there is no compensation in criminal issues. The best that the court can do or the state does is to convict the person if the matter is proved beyond reasonable doubt. The victim just goes like that. There are so many arguments in favor of ADR, but because of the shortness of time, we may not be able to look at all of that. Now, there are countries or jurisdictions that have already implemented ADR into their criminal, jurisprudence, into their criminal legal system. There are so many of them. That's why I said jurisdiction with ADR in their criminal jurisdiction. Nigeria is one of them. My brother here will know what I'm talking about. We used to have a very powerful lady. We call her Mrs. Ibru. She was the owner of the Oceanic Bank, very big bank. And through that banking system, she has appropriated so much funds to herself. And so we have the EFCC, Economic and Financial Crime Commission in Nigeria, who looks for people that have enriched themselves fraudulently. And so what do? They apprehended her. And instead of letting the matter go to court, because if it goes to the traditional court, it will take so many years before the matter is resolved. So what happens? We have to ask for what they call plea bargaining. Plea bargaining is a system where a criminal has agreed, look, I have committed the crime. Let's have agreed. I mean, that's true. But then, what do you want me to do? Okay, you have stolen so much money. I agree. Okay, how much did you steal? $1.4 billion. How much are you willing to return? That is ADR. But if the matter goes from trial to the end, you will not have anything. Because in law, cases are won or lost on technicalities. You may have a good case, but because of technicalities, you will lose that case. Do you understand what I'm saying? And so if the prosecution, the state counsel, the AG, the attorney general of a nation fails to present its case, technically, the woman will go, the criminal goes scot-free. And the state has lost so much money, the taxpayers' money for that matter. So Nigeria has one. Canada is a very good example. Other jurisdiction, I'm going to send the paper in, for the professor's consideration. US, of course, where we are now, has New Zealand, Germany, and Australia. Now, why I am doing all of this, that South Africa has one of the highest crime rate in the world. I presented the paper last year in the same conference. It's the last publication here. The title was Criminality and Victims of Crime in South Africa, Issues Arising. Every blessed day, over 50 people, every day, over 50 crimes are committed every day in South Africa in a minute. As at last year, South Africa was rated the 8th country in the world that have the highest crime. All the statistics are all there. And you know that they also talk about this issue of xenophobia. You know what I mean by that? Yes, where people from other races, but we are trying to make sure that it's controlled now. So don't be afraid to come to South Africa. South Africa is a good country. No, it's a good country, yes. It's a good country. I worked there. I worked with the University of South Africa. I did my PhD in University of Pretoria. But then the truth must be said. The truth must be said. If you have been following events about a month ago, one of the universities in South Africa, one of the students, a roommate just stabbed him to death. I don't know whether you guys are aware. Every blessed day on the street, both reported and unreported. My sister is also from the University of South Africa, so she knows what I'm talking about. Now, the question is ADR appropriate in the criminal justice context in South Africa? Well, my answer to that is in the affirmative. Like what I have said previously, the crime rate is very high. And you cannot overburden the courts. Because the courts are managed. The courts are manned by judges. How many cases as a judge, for example, do you want to hear, do you want to entertain in a day? How many? Because of the crime rate in South Africa. That is the argument that I am putting forward. That because of the crime rate, instead of taking the matter, the criminal cases to the ordinary, to the traditional court, bring it under the alternative dispute resolution. If a person is found guilty, if a person is found culpable, do the sentence instantly. Do the sentence instantly. Now, the major objective of conferencing in mediation process is to attempt to reconcile conflicting parties. Litigation does not reconcile party. It's either you win or what? You lose. That is the court system. That is the court system. Like I said, you can lose a case. You can have a good case. Sometimes clients come to us. Mr. Pius, do you think I will win this case? I said, well, it looks good. But if Mr. Pius does not present the case, well, what happens? The client loses. The client loses. That's what I'm talking about. There is no evidence to show that reconciliation of the offender with the victim and the community in a criminal case or a criminal matter exists. But under ADR, when the crime happens, three people are affected. Three people are affected: the criminal, the victim, and the community. And so there is the need for reconciliation, or to reconcile the three parties that are majorly affected with that crime. But in criminal matters, there is no reconciliation. There is no reconciliation. But under ADR, the major purpose of using ADR is to reconcile the warring party. And thirdly, South Africa has a very high crime rate. If it worked in other jurisdictions that I have mentioned before, I am of the humble submission that ADR can be used in a similar manner in South Africa as it's being used in all these countries that I have mentioned. Now, you can't talk about new concept in any jurisdiction without talking about the enabling law or about the enabling act that will make it possible. And for that to happen, there is the need for legal reform. There is the need for law reform. And I'll give credit to South Africa, because when it comes to law reformation, they are very good. Now, it might interest you to know that I did my research, my PhD research in South Africa, New Zealand, and US, particularly the state of Texas, where my jurisdiction of research. Now, South Africa has plethora of laws, policies, documentations, but implementation becomes the problem. When it comes to crime and crime victims compensation, South Africa has the best policies, documentation to that effect. But to implement it, it becomes a problem for the government. There is no crime compensation. There is no victim compensation in South Africa, for example. US has. Canada has. New Zealand has. Do you understand? No, Nigeria does not have. They just have a document in 1989 by IBB, that is the then military president in Nigeria. Up till now, there is there is a bill in the National Assembly since 2011 to develop a legal framework for crime victim compensation in Nigeria. It has not seen the light of day. Instead, they are fighting at the National Assembly. And so, South Africa is very good when it comes to, law reformation. You can see the chronology of the history of legal reformation that I have listed out in South Africa. Like I said, if you look at number 5, implementation is the problem. They have good intention. And so I believe that if South Africa can reform its laws to integrate ADR into its criminal jurisprudence, it will go a long way to develop the criminal justice administration. It is my humble submission that South Africa can learn. Learning is a process, and we learn every day until maybe we are no more. Education has no age limit. I believe South Africa can learn from other jurisdictions. Now, if it can work in Nigeria, I believe that it can work. Nigeria and South Africa, we are still, they call us, are we third, what do they call us? Third world. Yes, we are still developing. It worked in Nigeria. Even in youth offense or offense cases, youth offender cases, yes, it still works, especially in Lagos State. Lagos State is one of the provinces or one of the states in Nigeria that is very growing, advancing when it comes to legal advancement. It's one of the richest. It's a very small state in Nigeria, but it's one of the richest states in Nigeria. And so their legal system, the judiciary, they are doing very well because the state has expended so much money to make sure that, this justice system, it works. Yes, so I believe that if South Africa can learn from other jurisdictions, the ADR will become part of its legal system when law reformation is carried out and implementation is followed to the letter. It's one thing for you to make promises, it's another thing for you to keep to those promises. So I believe that South Africa can learn from other jurisdictions. I want to thank you all for coming, and I want to thank the Policy Study Organization. I will take questions after my sister has presented her paper. Thank you, and God bless you.
My name is Iveshni Reddy. I'm a lecturer in the School of Criminal Justice, College of Law at the University of South Africa. The topic that I'll be talking about today is addressing the increasing specter of cryptocurrency crime, a South African perspective. So, history and context. So, Bitcoin was the first cryptocurrency created in 2008. The concept of a cryptocurrency actually is rooted in a paper written by the pseudonymous Satoshi Nakamoto. And basically, he laid out the conceptual framework for the first cryptocurrency ever, which is Bitcoin. Since Bitcoin, there's been a plethora of cryptocurrencies in circulation. If you visit coinmarket.cap, it actually gives you the market value of each cryptocurrency and each cryptocurrency in circulation. And the purpose of Bitcoin basically was to exchange value directly from person to person without the use of middlemen. So as opposed to the traditional banking system where if you wanted to transact, to do a transaction, it has to go through the bank, it has to go through a payment clearinghouse and so forth. So the purpose of Bitcoin was, one, to eliminate the need of middlemen, two, to exchange value directly to each other, and three, to remove personal identification information. In the traditional banking system, you would have a credit card number, you would have your name and your address. With the Bitcoin transaction, there's no personal identification attached to it except a Bitcoin address, which just comprises of basically alphabets and numbers. Okay, so the ecosystem is quite broad. It's outside the scope of this discussion, but in order to contextualize this discussion, it's necessary to mention it. The Bitcoin, it basically consists of minings, online wallets where you store your cryptocurrency, and the blockchain, which is actually central to cryptocurrencies because it's the blockchain which serves as a ledger with the record of all transactions. So the status of Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies in South Africa, as in the rest of the world, it's unregulated in South Africa. So cryptocurrency crime basically came to light after the United States of America versus Ulbricht Silk Road case. I'm not sure how many of you have actually heard of the Silk Road case. Have you? Okay, great. So basically, Bitcoin facilitated the payment of illegal drugs and other illegal goods and services. There were also add-on services provided, such as mixers and tumblers, that enabled the laundering of Bitcoins for purposes of further anonymization. And then another case, United States versus Tendon Shavers. This basically involved Ponzi schemes and investment fraud. When I did my master's dissertation in 2016, there was a respondent who actually said, well, any scam you can do with money, you can do faster with Bitcoin. So basically, it's a tool for money laundering and a target for a host of other financial crimes, such as Ponzi schemes and investment scams and so forth. Internationally, there's a study by Kristen Nicholas, from Carnegie Mellon University, who actually did an empirical study and showed that there were over 50 crypto exchanges that have been hacked since 2013. The second important thing with regard to cryptocurrency crime is ransomware, where your computer is basically infected and payment is demanded in Bitcoin. So again, coming to the South African context, it's unregulated, it has no legal status. The South African government has taken a cautionary approach in addressing cryptocurrencies. And this is most notably through the dissemination of notices warning the public of the risks associated with cryptocurrencies. In terms of the extent of the crime, there's been a few cases regarding investment fraud and scams. Not much is known in terms of cryptocurrency usage in South Africa, as well in the rest of the world. There's an interesting study that was done by Cambridge University where they estimated that there are 3 million people actively using cryptocurrency wallets. So this is the underlying theme of the presentation, basically. As Pius alluded to earlier, South Africa has legislation in place, we have policies, but the issue seems to be with skills attainment and actually implementing these policies. So the Electronic Communications and Transactions Act and the Criminal Procedure Act, before 2002, were the two main pieces of legislation that would address crime or any crime that basically had an online element. Okay, since emerging technologies create new crimes, legislation needs to keep up with it. So again, cryptocurrency is basically an online currency with multi-jurisdictional presence. So therefore, other issues emanating from jurisdiction needs to be addressed, like expanded jurisdiction, which the bill actually provides for. So through an analysis of the bill, it may be used to successfully investigate and prosecute crimes facilitated by cryptocurrencies, but it may be hampered by a lack of skills and knowledge on the part of investigators and prosecutors. So actually looking through the bill, I haven't included it in this presentation, that would have taken up too much of time, but the statutory provisions are actually quite wide. There's things like cyber fraud that criminalizes any means, unlawful means that a person can get access to passwords to information online. So it's really, really quite wide. The limitation of this bill, however, they make no mention of any online means in which money can be laundered. And in this instance, we would have to rely on traditional financial crime regulation. And in South Africa, that would be the Combating and Prevention of Corrupt Activities Act and traditional anti-money laundering regulation. So again, alluding to what my colleague Pius mentioned, the legislation is there, but there seems to be a lack of implementation and skills attainment. So yeah, I'll take questions after Pius takes his questions. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you for listening. We don't know if you have any questions, any additions or commentaries you want to give to us or advice. We are ready. We are open for learning. Please just tell us your name and direct your question to any of us. Thank you.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Oluwara Yolajidetai from University of Ibadan, Nigeria. I studied criminology and security studies. My first speaker said a lot of things. The aspect of law enforcement agencies, I want to say, is one of those things that do not allow the implementation to be in place. What do we do about it? You made mention of one, EFCC, Economic Financial Crime Commission. But how about the police sector and other agencies that can enforce the implementation? What do we do about them? The xenophobic in South Africa was very serious at the time the thing occurred, and the police were careless, were passive. They did not do anything to curb it. It was very serious. Had it been that there were relations who were victims of such, what would they have done? So the law enforcement agencies are invoked. They need to what? To be carried along or abreast with this kind of program. So I want to ask, what do you do to integrate them into the ADR so that the society will be at peace? There is no society that is crime-free, but in a minimum way, at least, things will be curbed, and there will be, the rate of crime will be very low in that wise. So thank you.
Thank you. Let me quickly respond. You know that the police is one of the agencies of the state. It is controlled by the executive arm of government, so they are answerable to the highest authority. And now, you know, when it comes to criminal matters, actually it's the police that initiates the whole process. And when the matter goes to court, the police are out of the way, except, of course, when they are now required to come and give evidence as it concerns the investigation they have carried out. That's number one. Number two, the police can only be co-opted into the ADR system if there is a legislative framework that will enable them to do that. Nobody can do anything outside of the law. The law regulates every system in the society. And so the police cannot do anything until the government, the authorities put a legislative framework in place to enable them to do all of that. Now, secondly, on the issue of xenophobia. Now, I was in a conference about 2 weeks ago, was the Spring Law, the 6th Spring Law Conference organized by the law student of University of South Africa. Now, one of the speakers spoke the second day, actually raised an issue how the attack, the xenophobia attack, comes into play. Now, to be truthful to South Africans, they can't just see anybody because you are a foreigner and start to attack you. No. There are reasons for that. And I cannot say all of those reasons under this conference now. There are so many foreigners that don't have any legitimate business in South Africa, and they are also involved in criminality. I can't come to your house and want to take over your house. I cannot come to your house and come and take over your affairs. You will attack me. You will be confrontational. That's what happens under that circumstances. But the government of South Africa has also looked at the issue of attacking foreigners. That's why I said earlier that, look, there are some people who are in South Africa that don't have legitimate business. In fact, they don't even have visas. They don't have legitimacy to live in that place. And so if you see such people coming to your place, and misbehaving, one of such misbehaviors is drug selling. Drug selling. You also do know that drug issue is a very high problem in South Africa. Just find out. It's a very big problem. Now, I was listening to the radio before I came. So one of the things now is that they want to go into the schools, the elementary school, and start to teach the infants from the beginning. Because on the street of South Africa, well, I don't know whether you are a South African, but that's the gospel truth. In the university, you see a 15-year-old girl smoking on the road and nothing is done about it. I don't know whether you are from South Africa. No, just try. You know what I'm talking about. Everybody, well, not me not say, but almost everybody smokes. Ladies, men, almost everybody. And so the government of South Africa is trying to do something about it so that, such issues will be regulated. Thank you. I don't know if you have another question for my sister. Yes.
Actually, it's for you. How effective do you think ADR is when it comes to rape and murder cases?
Yes. Yes.
How effective is it? Because you mentioned other countries that have been using it. But when it comes to serious crime, where somebody was raped and killed, how do you...
That's a very good question. In the studies I have done and the jurisdictions that I have mentioned, those are even the worst cases that ADR has been used for. Murder and rape. Now, it is not easy. It is not easy. That is why there's always a pre-conference before before ADR is called. There is a pre-conference. What do I mean by a pre-conference? There is a counselor that will speak to the victim. Wait, this is what we are trying to do. That will also speak to the offender. Say, this is what we are trying to do. And so temper must have cooled down from both parties before that ADR can be arranged. And the victim must be willing to forgive.
Right, but in cases where the victim is actually dead.
Yes.
Family members.
Yes, we call them we have the direct victim and the indirect victim.
Right.
So the family members of the primary victim or the direct victim will be called upon. If they agree, that's why we said that the parties are actually in control of ADR. It must be with free consent. You cannot coerce, you cannot force anybody to attend ADR conferences. Do you understand what I'm saying? So both parties must be spoken to first, so that when they meet, it will not be another avenue of reoffending. We call it recidivism, of reoffending in the process of mediation.
And follow-up question. Do you think it will even deter further criminal behavior if you are resolving serious crimes through
Yes.
that kind of behavior?
Yeah, the research I have done so far, deterrence is very, very, very low.
Right.
Is very, very low. However, the people, especially the offenders, it makes them to own up to their offense or to their their misbehavior. And most often than not, those people, offenders that have attended ADRO processes, do not re-offend. Do not go back. Now we talk about in classical criminology, we talk about re-entering of the offender to become a better person into the society. You understand? And so when that conference is done through ADRO, you see that the person comes back and becomes, in fact, he contributes to the society by the time he comes back.
I'm worried because I know that ADR tends to be more effective when you're dealing with young people, juveniles.
Yes.
But when it comes to hardened criminals,
Yes.
it's not deterrent enough.
Yes, that's why I said that there must be a pre-conference. There must be talking to, and it does not come just in a day. You must have spoken counselors, the arbitrators that are experienced and that know the psychology of every person, must have had meetings with them one-on-one for several times over. Do you understand? It's not easy. Habit hardly dies. You understand what I'm saying? It's not easy to change such persons, but you need to speak to person and speak and speak and speak before the person can say, okay, I'm ready, so we can do this now.
Do you think, my last question, do you think the idea is going to be some kind of compensation we actually force family members to succumb to whatever conclusion?
Make compensation from which side now?
Who is going to compensate the victim's family? Is there any kind of compensation?
Okay, good. Compensation is actually from the state. There's a difference between compensation and that's another word.
Restoration?
Sorry, restitution. The offender does the restitution. The state does the compensation. That is why we are advocating for legal framework, because all of the jurisdiction, well, that's not what I'm talking about. Like Canada, for example, like the US, for example, like New Zealand, they have laws, they have acts, they have laws that says that the government must compensate any person that is victimized. Of course, there are also processes too. You can't just say, a person can just plan and say, okay, let me just hit you, and so we back. No. There are procedures that must be followed. So if the enabling law is there, the state compensates the victim.
Thanks.
Is any questions for Reggie, please?
Sorry.
Yes.
For
No.
sorry, I want to see this thing on a more macro analysis. You see, when we're talking of ADR, legal framework, criminal justice system, this thing boils down on the leadership problem and leadership mismanagement or corruption. The way I perceive, if the leader takes a good step of action to do something worthwhile, accepting the cultural values of a state, the citizens will enjoy it and they will follow the suit. But you see, the other way around, they are sorry to mention, some years ago, an inspector said in my country, why they will not stop equity, that is bribery and corruption. Because the rate of corruption or corrupt practices in the leadership realm is overwhelming in Africa. And that is what the followership are looking at to commit a lot of crimes And I wish and I believe that something must be done very, very soon to cope all these things. And by going in the way of federal the criminal justice system, whatever, out of you, the leadership in question is very important. So I don't know whether you have anything to say on that. Thank you.
Well, let's throw it open to everybody.
Sorry, for instance, if Mandela were to be alive, nothing of Xenophobia will come. It wasn't in the light of the day when he was alive. You imagine, Nigeria supported South Africa for independence and for other issues. Now, the man had gone. Things. I'm not supporting crimes from other, Nigerians behaving this and that. Even more than what I've said, they went into, marrying or hijacking women. Those things are part of the races of Zimbabwe. So please, if you can have anything to say on that, I wouldn't mind.
He said, who wants to please just comment a little bit on the issue of leadership. See, leadership, good or bad leadership, is a global phenomenon. It's not only Africa that is in this race now, but we know, for example, Nigeria. I'm from Nigeria. We know we have had issues of leadership. South Africa, Zimbabwe, those of you that have followed events in Zimbabwe, you know the circumstances under which Mugabe left power. He didn't even want to leave if you had followed the event. Now, Democratic Republic of the Congo, you see, it's a big problem. It's a big problem. Now, and the solution lies with every one of us. Charity, they say, begins at home. It must start with us. Not until we become the president of a nation. Not until we become the minister or we become whatever. It must start with all of us. All of us must join our hands together and advocate against corruption at whatever level it is. In our places of work, you don't have to be a member of the executive. You don't have to be a member of the legislature before you can be involved in corruption. What of in our offices where you are supervisors, where you are directors, where you are, just leading some people. So corruption is all over. It cuts across every fabric of the society. And so leadership on its own is a big issue, entirely, which we may not be able to discuss in this conference, But then, like I said, it comes down to every one of us. In the little way you can, do your own thing. When I attended a research methodology, when I started my program, my PhD program, University of Victoria, one of the questions I asked the Dean, Faculty of Law, was that, we are writing all these papers. We write conferences, we write articles, we write chapters, we write LLD, theses. When it comes to implementation, when we said to the government, the man said that, the answer he gave me was that, well, it's your duty to write. At least you have written something. In history, it will be on records that you have written. The implementation becomes that of the policymakers. Just say something wherever you find yourself. One day, let's hope that. Thank you. Any other question, please? We still have about a few minutes more. Those of us that came late, maybe we just see we'll send our paper in so that you can read them. Any question for my sister, please?
Let me ask.
Yes.
In the era of cybercrimes, how do you discourage the aspect of cutting away money from the individual's accounts and the government accounts? They call it Yahoo in Africa. Now, these people, they invent new system every day. In fact, if care is not taken, If they send message to you and you reply, you are a problem. Your money is gone. They have codes. How do you combat these crime codes in the system? You see, it's not a matter of theory. It's not a matter of talking. But the aspect of practical to cope cyber crimes. Many people have suffered their millions and disappointed to the 10 year. And they'll be in the corner. You will know who is who. Who will you cry? Who will you call? Who will you that? So these are the issues. Making people to be so poor in the country. Please, some things must be done. Please, how do you do it? It's not important. Thank you.
I think, the old adage is true, prevention is better than cure, so I see where you're coming with that. And I think that a certain level of responsibility lies with individuals. I think the minute you go online, you have to know what you're getting yourself into. And I think in such an interconnected world where in parts of Africa people have more access to the internet than they do clean water, it's imperative that they actually know. And I think there's a lot of online blogs that you could go to where they actually tell you what to watch out for, what to look out for. So I think there's a fine balance between the two in fighting cybercrime. I think on the one hand, if you're looking at prevention, the police are not going to go out there and tell you this is what you should do or this is what you shouldn't do. In terms of the South African government, they issue notices. The South African Reserve Bank, for example, would issue notices regarding financial crime to tell you this is what you should be aware of. Don't invest with Bitcoin, for example. Only use reputable exchanges. So, for example, there's 3 legitimate exchanges in South Africa. Use that. There's a website called bitcoin.za. And there they actually give you information and tell you what to look out for. So I think there has to be a balance between the two. The reason why I chose to analyze this bill is because there's been a lot of talk in South Africa about how there is not sufficient legislation, and that has been sort of the debate. But I think there is sufficient legislation, but it's just the implementation and the skills attainment. For example, in 2013, there was someone who reported a crime to the police station, and she says, my money's gone and I can't find it online. And the police couldn't understand what she was saying. And he said, cyber what? What do you mean by cyber? So I think, back to your comment, a lot more needs to be done in terms of the police are the first point of entry when a crime is committed. So I think it starts with them, especially the role of front police officers. They need to be educated. They need, for example, to actually know what a cryptocurrency is. I think we live in such a interconnected world where everything has become so online that we cannot afford to not know what's going on. And I think it starts with front police officers because in the South African police system, that's who you go to report a crime. So more needs to be done on that front. I'm very well aware of that in terms of the police. And I know they are making concerted efforts. 2 years ago, they had a training with the FBI, the Federal Bureau of Investigations, and Interpol, where they're actually working to create a space where they can promote active dialogue on these topics. And then the Cybercrimes and Cybersecurity Bill, one of the things that it's providing for, aims to create basically, is a 24/7 point of contact where police can come together and actually see how they can improve their skills. They're going to work with banks, they're going to work with various organizations, and members of the public are actually open to join these symposiums or these talks and actually talk about how they can improve the system and create more awareness.
Sorry. Let me just add to what she has said and in response to your question. Now, the communication industry has a lot to do when it comes to this kind of crime. Now, I opened this phone. I didn't want to open it before because there is a message I want to read to you here. And it was sent on the 7th of this month. And today is just 12th. It says that account error, customer, due to the maintenance in the bank. They didn't mention the bank. Your ATM debit card has been locked. To unlock it, they gave me a number. How did they get my number? Do you understand? Because in Nigeria, for example, you can go to any telecommunication industry and buy phone numbers from people on the pretense that they want to use it to do business, to market their product or their services. And so, just in response to what she has said, the telecommunication industry has a lot of things to do when it comes to this kind of crime. Because they wouldn't know my number. I don't know them from anywhere. So how did they have access to my telephone? And I'm not in Nigeria, I'm in South Africa. You understand what I'm saying? Okay, maybe let's just...
Thank you. Just as a follow-up, I'm doing similar research. I'm researching cybercrime, but more of like social media harassment and stuff like that. And what I am noticing is that although there are laws out there, the law is not catching up with the speed of social media or of the internet in general. And I mean, although the police are becoming, at least in the UK, more aware of what's happening, of revenge porn, of, phishing scams and all of that, sometimes the response that victim gets is similar to what domestic violence victims used to get. So if you don't like the heat, get out of the kitchen, or all of that dumb stuff. But what I was wondering is, and that's probably a bit of a loaded question, but where do you think we're heading? Because I don't think the internet is going to stop in its speed, but the law has obviously not kind of caught up with that. It's obviously not going fast enough, and there might be a chance that some law is approved this year that becomes valid next year, but then the internet is already like 10 years ahead. Do you have any recommendations? Do you have any idea? Because obviously I'm speaking from an academic perspective, and I'm quite curious of where things are going to go.
Thank you for that question. Well, yeah, that is difficult because ideally, in a South African context, as I'm sure is in the case with the UK, as evidenced by the Cybercrimes and Cybersecurity Bill, which came out in 2015 already, and now we're in 2018, and it hasn't been approved yet. So I think that the government is cognizant of the need, but I think it just takes too much time to actually get there. Keeping up with technology, there's an Indian academic, Robert Sharma, who refers to it as the principle of updating construction. The law must not lag behind, but keep up with technology at the pace in which technology keeps up. And I think the reality is that can't be done because of how technology changes. As you said, there's one scam invented now, and then 5 minutes later, it's not, I think, practically, I don't think that's possible. That the law, I think technology will always be one step ahead of the law. And I think that's just because in terms of actually getting it out there and getting it approved, it just takes too much time. I think ideally, if there could be a system where legislators could work together to quickly sort of promulgate legislation necessary, then I think that would be great. But the other point that I would like to bring in is the possibility, my recommendation would be the possibility of creating comprehensive legislation that covers cybercrime. And the Cybercrimes and Cybersecurity Bill of 2017 in South Africa, it's really, really wide. If you look at the statutory provisions in terms of all of the crimes that can be committed online, it's really, really wide. And I think the legislation is there, but I think it depends on investigators and prosecutors to recognize and to see how they can actually impute that, and to see how they can use that to successfully investigate and prosecute these crimes. So I don't think it should be so much a question about the law is lagging behind, although that is the case in many countries. I think it's more of how can we use existing legislation to prosecute those crimes. And I think that's where the role of investigators are crucial, because then that's where skill attainment comes in, and that's where prosecutors and judges at large, they need to be educated on the basics. What is happening out there? I think we have a lot of old judges. It's not only the case in South Africa, but that's globally. And they grapple to understand how these crimes can be committed online. So I think it comes down to education, and I think an awareness of investigators and prosecutors, and I think at large the judicial system, to be aware of what is happening and how they can actually use existing legislation to prosecute these new crimes. I think they're very overwhelmed by the jargon that comes with cybercrime and the complexity. And I think that's one of the limitations of it. So that would be my recommendation, to look at it from that point.
Well. Yeah. Because what I'm saying is, if someone stops you on the street and threatens to assault you, how different is it from doing it online? And same, like if someone gets money from you in the street stealing, doing it online is just another way of doing it. But I think by creating all these new laws, in a way, they're making criminals get away with it a lot more, like in an easier way, and also they're complicating their lives because they're not educated about the problem.
That's true. So it's a balance between legislation that's comprehensive enough to say that we recognize this is criminal and we're criminalizing it. And on the other hand, for the judicial system to actually have an awareness of what is going on. So I think it's a balance between the two, which is a delicate balance, and ideally that's what I think every country is striving to get to in the cyber age.
Sorry that you see me talking. The thing is born in my heart. See, apart from alternative dispute resolution, truly the leadership have raised Nigerians, citizens, African citizens to be impoverished through their policies, through their policy results, through their attitudes, through their lack of culture of others. But let me say this. Now, I want to little bit provide a solution. ADR can be used to mediate in such a crime, after which the law, statutory law must be made through legislative bill to imprison such people in society, so that the society will be cleansed from all this mess. I think you're okay with me.
Yes, I'm listening.
If ADR comes in to mediate, it's true, then we can hijack what he has stolen. Victimless will be compensated. Whatever you can do, you do it. But at the same time, that's true law, through the legislative bill must be implemented to imprison such people.
Yeah.
So that there will be a kind of, cleansing in society. And I think the idea is okay.
Well, you see, before I respond to his issue, in addition to what my sister has said, when it comes to the issue Caroline has raised, I think one of the problems we have with this cybercrime is how do we apprehend the perpetrators? For example, these people that sent me this message, if I had complied with what they have said, and I give them my PIN number to my account so that they can unlock it, they can move all the money away. The question is, how do we apprehend them? I think the system, the state, or whosoever is responsible has to look like, that's why I said that the communication industry is very important. I know, for example, there's a way they can trace me through my telephone and know where I am at a particular point in time. Except if I remove the SIM card from my phone, they will not be able to trace me. And so the issue of apprehending those people, maybe your researchers have to look at that. Because if you don't apprehend an offender, how do you prosecute the person? So that's one of the issues. Then, sir, the law, that's what we call, in law, there are maxims. There is the principle of odi aterem patem and nemo judes in casuasa. Odi aterem patem means you have to listen, hear the other side. That is why the court, if I take you to court, for example, if the court does not see you, they can't give judgment against you. I must give you notice. I must let you know that I have issue against you in the court. Now, the court cannot just imprison anybody. They must hear you out first. And so, even if the ADRO is used, the court cannot sentence the person. Because what enables the court to impose sentences is based on is based on the law. Do you understand? And every law is subject to the constitution of every country. The constitution is the number one law of every country. And so the procedures of sentencing and judgment handling are laid down in an enabling law. Do you understand what I'm saying, sir? And so the court cannot say, okay, ADR, you have done, so we are sending you to court. No. You must listen to the other side, and the law must be followed stricto sensu. If the laws are not followed, everybody will be in prison by now. Yes. Okay, yes, please. Okay, we must leave in the next 15, 20 minutes because another section begins here by 10:30. Yes. I mean, sorry, by 11:30, sorry.
Ms. Reddy, you
have a question?
mentioned personal responsibility and education. Dr. Pius, you talked about telecoms being responsible. You know, there's a research by Professor Wu and Lawrence in their book Law Code as Law. They suggested that instead of us wasting time looking for the cyber criminals, we should actually be policing and controlling the telecommunications, the internet service providers, because whatever we are doing goes through them.
Exactly.
They even went ahead to suggest having like a digital ID card. It's not going to be forced, but you need it to operate. I believe with them that that's a better way. Instead of us wasting time trying to police people, we can do.
So what are you suggesting, sir?
I agree with them that we need to hold internet service providers responsible. So if you want to use the internet, you got to have a digital ID card. You're not going to be forced, but you can't really operate on the internet without it. And they gave the example of like state ID cards. Like federal buildings, you can't go in if you don't have a state ID, and it's controlling people's behavior. So that's a better option, I think. We might have to explore that.
Yeah, that's interesting, but then it also brings up issues of privacy and our constitutional right to privacy. And that's another topic in itself. So again, it's about finding that balance. Because, I mean, we can't go against the right to privacy.
That's why they use the state ID cards, driver's license. You don't have to. If you want to drive, you got to have a license. If you want to enter a federal building, you have to have an ID. You're not being forced to. So it's like your privacy is there, but if you want to operate online to defraud people, it's not going to happen. Something like that.
I have a question.
Yes.
So in the United States, you're for the regulation of Bitcoin, right?
No, not
No,
really.
okay. So in the United States, Bitcoin is considered intangible. So under the tax laws in the IRS, that it would fall under capital gains taxes. So you, every time, let's just say you bought a cup of coffee that was $5 with a Bitcoin that you had paid $4 for, then you would have to, you would have to keep a record of every single transaction. So how does that work? Would you have to pay taxes on that?
In the United States, I think so. The tax of cryptocurrencies is outside the scope of this paper.
Oh, okay.
So the paper was just confined to the cyber security bill and how it can be used to prosecute cryptocurrency crime. So it had nothing to do with the regulation. Yeah, that's outside the scope of this article. But you can look, the Internal Revenue Services in 2013 issued a notice. And in that notice, they officially made the statement that they will be taxing cryptocurrencies as property. And there's actually an entire article set out to advise members of the public on how it will actually be taxed. So if you're interested, you can look at that notice. It was 2014, yeah, by the Internal Revenue Services. So, yeah.
Okay, if there's no other question, we want to thank you for attending this session.